I got the title up there, and the scripture references to start off with is what was read just a few moments ago by Brother Merv. Every year, with maybe one exception, I've always started off the year by reading through the New Testament, and I do it in a different translation. There's 5 of them I'll read, and sometimes I'll read through it twice a year, but once a year for sure. And I was doing that this year, and I got to the middle of John, and I saw something that I had seen, I don't know, hard telling how many times, but it was like I'd never seen it before. And I couldn't get it out of my mind. And Sean and I have coffee every morning, and I was telling him about it. And I said, you know where the passage at? And I told him what it was. And I said, you know what? I said, there's the basis of the gospel. It's not Galatians, but that lends to it. I said, there's the basis of the gospel right there. There it is. Stop and think about something that Jesus said. And you've got to ask yourself, at least I do, is this being heard today? Think about it. Is this something that Jesus said? Is it being heard today? There's a lot of preaching that takes place across the country, including among us. And do we know what the basis of the message is across the board? Well, we'd be sure that we would be finding out, well, it should be all about love, and it should all be about faith, or it should all be about grace. It all should be about baptism. It should all be about the church. It all should be about the plan of salvation. All of those things are important. They're all important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're not important. They are. But what about the thing that's right down there at the basis, the thing that props and holds everything else up? Is that what we're hearing? How close to the original gospel message are we hearing today? I don't know. I can't say in a lot of places, but I want to respectfully suggest that a lot of times we can't answer the question of what the basis of the gospel is because, well, you know what? We haven't heard it all that often. And therefore we don't know. Now we've heard lots of good things, but we really haven't heard this, something that's important. It's possible, I've done it, sit in an audience, large or small, doesn't matter, and you hear multitudes of sermons, and yet you fail to discern the message of the New Testament. That's right. And compounding that is the fact that it's, well, again, not being preached. So we look out about us at the mainstream denominational churches and the many independent evangelical churches in this area. And all of them, though they all may have different names, have the same basic doctrine. Is that the message of the gospel? It's very easy to say, no, it's not, because they're this or that or the other, and so on. And, well, they're wrong because they're that. What about if we don't do it? Are we right when we don't do it? Well, you know, we're the Church of Christ, so we can't be wrong. I hope we don't adopt that kind of attitude. I think sometimes we fail to do it. And I think it's something that's important. So we're going to look at what the real message, the basic message of the gospel is, and we need to think about this. And we'll get to the passage that sparked my interest for this in just a moment or two. But first, I want to point out to you that an old problem connected with this is that we want to hear what we want to hear. I'm speaking of human beings in general. And it goes all the way back to about the 8th century before Christ. That's 2,800 years, at least what we're looking at right now. And that's in the book of Isaiah. It's in Isaiah chapter 30. In Isaiah chapter 30, and we take a look, I'm not going to read all these, but it's in, the whole context is Isaiah 30, verses 1 through 13. It starts off in verse 1, woe to the rebellious children who take counsel, but not of me, and who devise plans, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. And this goes on, and at some length, to talk about where they're getting some of these things from. But then you get over here to about verse 9, and he says, now you go write it on a tablet and note it on a scroll, whatever it is. You write these things down, that it may be for time to come, forever and ever. And he's back to the subject that this is a rebellious people, lying children, children who will not hear the law of the Lord. Sounds serious, doesn't it? And now we get into what the nuts and bolts of this is. Who say to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us right things. Speak to us smooth things, prophesy deceits. Get out of the way, turn aside from the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. Now, just look at what's going on here. You need to write all this down so you'll remember it. And what it's essentially saying here is, get these messages from God, the Word of God. Get that stuff out of here. We don't want to hear that. We want to hear the things that please us, that are acceptable to us. Something different than that's coming from God. In verse 12, then the Holy One of Israel responds to this. Because you despise this word, and trust in oppression and perversity, and rely on them, therefore this iniquity shall be to you, like a breach ready to fall, a bulge in a high wall, whose breaking comes suddenly and in an instant. Well, that's what you want, and get ready. You've sown the wind, you're going to reap the whirlwind. That's a passage that you find in Hosea. It's an old problem that's been around for a long time. It did not disappear during the time of Jesus. The passages that Brother Merv read show that it was present in the times of the New Testament. The only way this problem goes away is if we ignore it and pretend that it does not exist, and we want something else instead. In Romans chapter, if we go centuries later, Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. Let's take a look at that. And we'll find here, and this is speaking about the Jews, and some of their problem was in embracing the gospel message, where Paul says, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they may be saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted to the righteousness of God. Paul was a Jew. He's speaking here on behalf of his nation. Understand when he says, my heart's desire, he wants more than anything else for Israel to be saved. He doesn't want any of them to be lost. But then he goes on to say that they're not listening. They've got this zeal. It's not according to knowledge. And then to top it all off, and something that if he thought about it, it must have caused him to just weep bitter tears. They've not submitted to the righteousness of God. Why did they do that? Because they wanted to come up with their own righteousness. They wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. And we'll just make it up as we go along if that's what's necessary. You think about that and how sad a thing that is. You get over to Romans chapter 16 and verses 17 and 18, and he touches on this just briefly when he says, I urge you, brethren, note those who cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and avoid them. For those who are such do not serve our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own belly, and by, here we go, smooth words and flattering speech deceive the hearts of the simple. That's what was going on. The smooth words, the flattering speech, patting people on the back, and other things like that. Anything at all to just make things go down easier and smoother and all that, but not with the truth now, not with that. Now that's the situation there, And once again, I think that that's got to cause problems. And as he says here, they serve their own belly, their own appetites. They're going to whet their own appetites with the truth that they want to hear. And I think that's really evident when you get over to 2 Timothy and you get into chapter 4 and read verses 3 and 4. The time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap for themselves teachers. They will turn their ears away from the truth, and they'll be turned aside to fables. So verse 4 is saying the same thing we've looked at in all these other passages, even back in the Old Testament. What are they going to do? They're going to turn their ears away from the truth, and they're going to be turned aside to fables. They'd rather have that than the truth. But look what tops it off is what's in verse 3. They're going to go out here and they're going to find these fellows that will teach this. And they just seems like they can't find enough of them. We want more. What does it say there? It says they're going to heap up for themselves. They can't get enough of it. And so it goes in the first century. And I think so it goes in the 21st century as well. I got to catch up here. Now, what we've got, and I call this what's happening now, lack of better terms, but back in 1980, a man out in California by the name of Rick Warren, young man, fresh out of college, and he was in the church planting business with the Southern Baptist Church, and they had targeted an area, and they're going to start a church there. And the way they did it, the church planting team took this questionnaire and they went out all over this part of Southern California. And they asked people, when people would come to the door and give them the time of day, they asked them, what kind of a church would it take for you to go to that church? Boy, you talk about a question that's just loaded like a shotgun. And you can about imagine. But they took all the answers, they compiled them, they got all the data together, and then they started a church in a garage, and they had about 7 people come. I understand today there's about, in the run of a week, they meet more than once. In the run of a week, they've got about 30,000 people go through the Saddleback Church. And what kind of church is it? Whatever you want it to be. That's what it is. I read a man, wasn't a Christian, he was writing for a secular paper. They went to Saddleback to see what all was going on. And he just had an honest description of it. He wasn't critical, he wasn't harsh. He just wrote what he saw. I tried to see it through his eyes and everything that was going on there before you ever got to where the sanctuary was at. All the things out there, the coffee bars, the tennis courts, the volleyball courts, everything was out there, the juice bars, and you go through all this stuff before you. And I thought to myself, it sounded like the Indianapolis State Fairgrounds when you're walking through that. Amazing, amazing. But it's what the people want, and we're going to give it. And you know what's absent? The basic message of the gospel. You're not going to hear it there. You're not. Not if you're operating on that kind of a premise. And then down in Houston, there's a church down there. And what do? Well, they're about 35, 40,000 people. I don't know what the brag is now. But the man that's preaching there, Joel Osteen, he's been on TV, he's been interviewed, and he will boldly say, I'm not going to say a word about sin. I'm not going to preach out of that Bible. Maybe once in a while I'll mention it in passing. And what does he do? I would categorize him as a motivational speaker. But a preacher, gospel preacher, no, not even close to any of that. But he's popular. And why is he popular? Because he says the things that people want to hear. Surprise. What's been going on for 2,800 years, still going on today. Isn't that something? That's what's happening tonight, or happening now. So what kind of a church do you want? Now, when you see something like this or consider something like this, we really should realize that there are certain, they used to call these, I guess they still do, there are certain buzzwords, important words that you hear from these kinds of things. Buzzwords like, well, there's felt needs. We want to address felt needs. And we want to be a seeker-friendly church. And you've really got to talk to somebody that's involved in that to find out what that means. It's not that simple. Another thing is that, well, it's just the same old thing. It's what people want, not what they need. Those are two different things. I learned that when I was just a little boy. My dad had this grinder, and I could hear it running once in a while. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and he was one day sharpening a hatchet on the grinder. And I was watching that, and he put that thing up there, and you've seen how they work, and the sparks just went up in a big rooster tail, and I just stood there looking at that. Well, I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my 5 years of living. And he got done with it so he could hear me, and I looked at him and I said, I need that. And he said, son, you don't need that, you want that. There's a big difference between needing something and wanting something, and as you go on in life, you're going to understand that. And I didn't understand anything about that at that time, except that I wasn't going to get that grinder. But I sure learned as time went on that there's a big difference between the two, and I think we all do. If we don't, well, good luck. The main points that you'll hear, and there's been books written with this title, Become a Better You. Is that what Jesus died for, that you would just become a better you? Or your best life now? I don't think our best life is now. I think our best life is yet to come. I think our best life is beyond this life. And I've believed that for 40-some years. I hope you do. And yet, boy, we want to cling to this life now, and we want to make it better. It's almost like we want heaven to be here on earth. And it's never going to be here on earth. Never. Never. I put a quote today online that there was a preacher up in Boston, Massachusetts, several centuries ago, Increase Mather. The Mather family was famous up in that area. Someone wrote Increase Mather a letter and said, you know, I just wanted to know if you were still in the land of the living. And he said, no. Wrote back, said, no. I'm in the land of the dying. I'm going to the land of the living. Think about that. We all are. Your best life now. Then there are other things that come along. They're often repeated. Things like this. This is a desire. Now, this comes from not from the preachers that are putting this stuff out, but people that go for this. I want to feel loved for who I am, to be pitied for what I've gone through, to feel intimately understood, to be accepted unconditionally. And certainly that ought to be something that happens. But is that what it's all about? Think about that for a minute. It's all about me. I want to experience a sense of personal significance and meaningfulness. I want to gain self-esteem to affirm that I'm okay. I want to be entertained, to feel pleasure in the endless stream of performances. I want to experience life as thrilling and moving. I want to be a better dad or mom. Now, all those things aren't wrong in and of themselves, as far as that goes. But if we think that's what the church is supposed to provide or the gospel is supposed to provide, well, you've missed the point. The message being offered has oftentimes been referred to as moralistic therapy. Think about that, moralistic therapy. It's just to make you feel better about morals and how you live and one thing and another. And chances are the morality will be relative. It's heavy on emotionalism. It's subjective. Subjectivism is actually the working mechanism. It's a theory that thinking or feeling good is the ultimate goal. I think we ought to feel or think good. I do. It's not the ultimate goal at all. Then we're told another thing, and we hear this a lot: you invite Jesus into your heart. I got no idea what that means. That's the major message in the denominational world. Invite Jesus into your heart. Just exactly how do you do that? Well, you pray this prayer. They say, well, you pray this prayer. Well, you do this, you do that, you do the other. You got to have some kind of experience. You got to have some kind, what is it, feeling up there? And it's all subjective and one thing and another. And but that's what you're doing. And I just, where do you find that in the Scriptures? Well, there's Paul, and he's up there in Lystra, and they're just about ready to sacrifice to him, and he stops them, and he said, no, don't offer sacrifice for us or to us. Don't do that. What you should do is invite Jesus into your heart. No, he didn't say that. And there he is with all those learned people in Athens, and they're on Mars Hill, and he's trying to explain things to them, and they start mocking him, and he says, well, just invite Jesus into your heart. He did talk about Jesus, but he talked about Jesus and his death and what that meant. And he told them that you could find God if you look for him. Problem was, they weren't looking for him. And then there'll come along some serious problems. Feel free to come up with any serious problem you can think of, any of them. And you know what's being offered? A sop. A sop. It's something that's dipped in. It's just a morsel that you're given. That's what you get. You don't get any real answers. You don't get any real help. You get a sop. Thinking, well, you'll take that and you'll think, this is what and you'll go away. Things like, feel good about yourself. When you're having real problems, think good about yourself. Hold your head up. It's not that bad. No one is perfect. Don't let it get you down. You're going to go to the Bible to hear those things? You could probably go to Dr. Phil and hear those things, or Oprah. She's not on anymore. You have to go to Dr. Phil. Do they help? I don't know whether they help or not. There may be a little bit of help in all those things. But is that the answer from the Scriptures? Is that what it's all about? Is that the message that went out to other people? Now I want you to go to where I was reading. It starts in John chapter 7. This is where all this comes from, John chapter 7. And you got to start actually with the very last verse and then go into chapter 8. It says and the last verse there, verse 53, is actually transitional to get you to one part of something. When all these things come up, what's missing here? Think about that. What's missing? In all these things that they're told, what's missing? That's what we're going to look at here. Now, this test case I've got here. The woman was taken in adultery. And it starts off here, the transitional passage, everyone went to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. What do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And when those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning from the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. Now keep in mind, there's lots of accusations here, but no condemnation. The condemnation would have been the stoning. No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now you see everything that's happening here. And I'll tell you what, if you notice, you might have this in your footnotes or something, that sometimes this is questioned as canonical. They say, well, it's not found in some manuscripts. That also means it is found in some manuscripts. It's not found in all of them. It's found in some of them and not found in some others. But people want to just throw it out. Well, I don't think you can do that. Another thing that comes up, they caught the woman in the very act of adultery. Now, I'm from a small area in Indiana, pretty well a backward part of the country. I always tease Martha and tell her she's a hillbilly and I'm a flatlander, but we're both from hillbilly country. And we pretty well know what adultery is, and we pretty well know that it takes a man and a woman to be involved in adultery. But they brought the woman there. They didn't bring the man there. And so the question will come up anytime these are discussed. The question will come up, where's the man? I will give you an answer. I have no idea. I don't know. There isn't anybody that knows. People will say, maybe it was one of them that brought her over there. I don't know. I still don't know. And nobody knows. Well, so why waste our time going down that path with that? Another thing that comes up is that what did Jesus write? Now he wrote down and he wrote twice. And everybody will get themselves all bent out of shape. What did he write there on the ground? I have an answer for that. I have no idea what he wrote on the ground. He wrote something. Well, he wrote their names. I don't know. He wrote the name of the man. I don't know what he wrote. He wrote some passages from the Old Testament that were germane to the subject. I don't know that either. I don't know, and I don't think that there's anybody that knows what he wrote on the ground. I know he wrote on the ground. That's about it. But then that just gets us away from the subject matter, you see. Now, of course, it was a trap. If anybody can't see that, if you can't see that this was a trap, you wait there in the back and I'll help you find your way home. Now, if you can't understand that was a trap. Of course it was. That's all they spent their time doing at this particular point in Jesus' life, trying to trap him. Of course it was. Now, the thing is, though, that after just a little bit, I got no better way of explaining this except they all lost steam. One after another, they're all gone. Isn't that something? They all just vanished. Now the law says, back in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 22 and following, that on adultery you're supposed to stone the participants in the adultery. You're supposed to stone them, both of them. And then on stoning, when it comes to this business of stoning, in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 6 through 7, those that have the accusation are the ones that are supposed to do the stoning. In other words, you don't have an accusation and you bring somebody out there and you accuse them of something and then let everybody else stone them. If you made the accusations, you're responsible for doing the stoning. Hence, Jesus said, whoever's doing this, let him cast the first stone. They're not doing it. Makes you kind of wonder about the charge just a little bit. Certainly it makes you wonder about the bravery of these individuals. Now, the role of Jesus. He says there that he did not come to condemn. Seems to me sometimes condemnation is something that people want to engage in far too easily. and too freely. Also over in John chapter 3, verse 17. John chapter 3, verse 17. Well, that's right after John chapter 3, verse 16. One of the most well-known verses in the Bible. And verse 17 comes right on the heel of that. What does it say? After saying that Jesus loved the world, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life, then it says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. Why did Jesus come here? To handle a divorce case in Jerusalem, a case of adultery, and all these other things that they came. Is that what he came here for? I know he answered lots of things, handled things in the best way that he could, and gave the best answers. But is that why he came here? Think about that for just a little bit. I think we find the reason why he came, as it says there in verse 17, that the world through him might be saved. You know the passage, well known, Luke chapter 19, verse 10, that the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. That's why he came here. There it is right there. We're getting real close to the basis of the gospel right here. That's why Jesus came. That's why he died. Now, I can obey the gospel. I can become a Christian. I can live a life trying to pattern myself after the rules and regulations that constitute righteousness in the New Testament, and I might become a better husband and a better dad as a result of that. That's not why Jesus came here, to make me a better dad. Jesus came here to seek and save the lost. That's me. That's you. That's everybody outside of this building. That's why he came. That's why he died. And look at what he said in the light of what's popular today. Here's where it's at. Jesus says to this woman, go and sin no more. Think about how that stacks up against what's popular today. He says, go and sin no more. You're a Christian? You got problems? Well, I can give you some advice on maybe how to, get things a little better, a little more organized. But now, you need to understand this. You go and sin no more. You've become a Christian, a new Christian. Go and sin no more. You've been a Christian and you've fallen by the wayside and you want to come back and you want to make things right. We'll pray with you and for you. And then you go and sin no more. Jesus died, and in his death he's saying, go and sin no more. That's the basis of the gospel. It's about sin. Overcoming sin through Jesus, and you go and you sin no more. You know, one of the things about this, when you consider what Jesus said, to consider what he did not say. Now, we've already seen this. He didn't look at her and say, feel good about yourself. I doubt that she was doing that particular moment. He didn't say, now you hold your head up. He didn't pat her on the back and say, well, it's not that bad. I had someone tell me one time, she had her son. He was, tell you now, she tried to convince herself that he was not getting into trouble. And this boy was just as wild as a turkey. He was in all kinds of trouble with the law and everything. And I knew that. And, and then she finally relented a little bit and she said, well, it's not that bad, He might be doing a little bit of shoplifting and a bunch of other, look at that thing. This thing doesn't like me. He said he might be doing a little shoplifting and other things like that. And if somebody were to leave something laying loose or something, he might, stuff like that. He said, it's not that bad. And then she says, after all, it's not like he's murdering somebody. Glad to hear that because they lived right next door. But they're rationalizing this. And I'm afraid sometimes that's what we do. And really, don't go over there and say, well, it's not that bad. It is bad. Go and sin no more. Seemed like that's an answer. He didn't look at this woman and say, no one's perfect. He didn't look at her and say, don't let it get you down. Remember what he said? I'm going to put it up there again. Go and sin no more. There's the real basis of the gospel. Now, other things are important, and we need to hear about that. No question about it. But we've lost sight of this. You don't hardly hear this in gospel meetings anymore. You hear a lot of good things in gospel meetings. You don't hardly hear that anymore. I've said this before. Some of the times, one of the things that I've been asked a time or two, I'm going to Tuckerman for a gospel meeting starting next Sunday. And I got asked, do you have a theme? And I said, no, sir. I said, I try to avoid those things. I don't like getting locked in on a theme, because sometimes you find out you need to do something else maybe than what you'd planned. But sometimes they've got a theme, and I look at this and I think, well, here we go. Fine. If somebody wants to do that, that's fine. But one time when we were in West Virginia, the church in Charleston, I used to try and go down. There's a long way. And I tried to go down. There's an hour and a half drive. I tried to go down one night. And they were having a gospel meeting. I didn't go to this one because the theme was depression. Dealing with depression. 8 sermons on depression. I didn't go because I thought to myself, I don't want to hear that, I mean, it'd be good to hear it, but I didn't think I needed to hear that. Wasn't having any problem with that I knew of. I'm sure that Dr. Phil could tell me I was, but anyway. I'm not picking on him. That's his specialty. But I just thought to myself, if you were there and you heard, and if I was there and I heard 8 sermons on depression by the end of the week, I think I'd pretty well be depressed. Is that why Jesus came here? For a gospel meeting, 8 days about depression. Do it one time. Do it on a Wednesday night when home folks are there. That'd be fine. I got no problem. But when you do that, you leave out messages about go and sin no more. You leave that out. I think a lot of the problems that depress people today are directly related to sin, myself, but then. That's just me. Go and sin no more. You've got the real basis of the gospel right there. It's about sin, and it's about the remedy of it. And also, I want you to look at the words of Jesus there as words of encouragement. This means that you can stop sinning. Go and sin no more. Oh, I don't know if I can do that or not, Lord. You're going to take an argument up with the Lord? Oh, no, Jesus, you're wrong on that one. Is that what you're going to do? You'd be a braver person than I am. But that's what he's doing, and he's telling that to this woman. And telling it down through the ages to us today, that we can do this. We might become slaves of sin. We don't have to remain slaves to sin. There's lots of ways in which we can get away from this. We can indeed go and sin no more. Well, anyway, I see the clock up there. Whoever put them things up in church buildings, well, I think that they ought to be reprimanded. Anyway, the message is about sin and salvation and the remedy of it. It's not about a better you or your best life now. Your best life, as I said, is yet to come. And I want to back that up. If you'll go and sin no more, here's what's at the end. It's in Romans chapter 2 and verse 7, where it says, eternal life to those who by patient continuance in doing good seek for glory, honor, and immortality. Your best life can be yours, but not here. It's in the afterwhile. And it'll only be yours if you go and sin no more. we'd like to help you. I've already mentioned about obeying the gospel or about coming back to the Lord. Whatever the case might be, if we can help you to do that tonight, you've heard the gospel, you believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, you go, you sin no more, you repent. And then you're baptized and you can find the forgiveness of your sins. We'd be happy to pray with you and for you that you might be returned to a proper station in the sight of the Lord. Whatever the case might be, if you're subject to invitation, would you come while together we stand and sing?